Well, on that note, let's dive in, everybody. I know we're recording, we're underway. Quick note from me, if we've never met before, I'm John Phillips. I'm CEO of Philcom Global. We are an emerging industries and technology PR firm that has the pleasure of working with Advanced Glazings and several other of the fantastic Nova Scotia-based Milburn Lilly companies. So War on Dull Buildings. This is a co-production effort by AGL, glazing innovation leaders and makers of Solera and SoleraWall, world famous, should need no introduction, and Better Buildings for Humans podcast and community, which of course is also produced by AGL and explores the vital connection between the built environment and the human experience. So just real quick at the top here, what do we mean when we talk about dull buildings? What is that? Dull buildings is everything from physical manifestation to a state of mind that is tired, lackluster, outmoded, and simply just not cutting it for occupants, owners, architects, and all stakeholders of the built environment. It's a dark metal box on the highway side, grossly underserving its occupants who deserve daylight and an environment that fosters wellness, productivity, and inspiration. It's failing to realize that in 2024, as we'll talk about today, sustainable buildings actually impact the bottom line and revenue for companies. And so many more things that we'll explore over today's two sessions, which are the last two in our two-day inaugural summit here. So a quick reminder for our panelists, the session is only an hour long, so please be thorough in your answers, but we want to be mindful of time so we can get through all of the sort of prepared prompts that we've shared for discussion. And now I'm proud to introduce Doug Milburn, co-founder, chairman, and president of AGL, and Melissa Chanel, marketing innovation specialist, for our discussion, which of course is Revenue Reimagined, the economic power of sustainable design. Take it away, Doug and Melissa.
Sure. So first thing to do with that, yeah, let's just introduce our let's just say a little bit more about our topic here, revenue reimagined, and it's something I really looking forward to hearing our panelists' views as we go through this. So we're kind of at an inflection point in in the buildings industry, in society, an awareness that sustainability is essential. And it was really focused down onto an awful lot of focus on CO2 as I'm going to call it a critical issue. There's a lot of issues around, and CO2 and energy, which are intimately related, are top of mind right now. So, with that context, when we think about buildings, it's there is so much to buildings. Okay, so we talk about building design. Somebody goes out to design buildings. There are just so many aspects. Why do we go indoors? I mean, we go indoors to get out of the elements. That's a critical thought to always keep in mind. And we go into buildings to get out of the elements, but we go into buildings to do things. And it's those doing things, it's that human, state when we go inside a building, that needs to drive everything. We want to live our lives. We want our lives to be rich and rewarding, and buildings play a big role in that. So anybody who designs buildings, I have deep respect for the multitude of things that they have to do. So we get to this inflection point right now, and I think that there's a danger that the energy and CO2 issue, which must be dealt with. There's a dog here, and that's a mission critical tail, but tails shouldn't wag dogs. And somehow we have to figure out how we make buildings that serve their purpose. They're built for human beings. They got to serve that purpose. That purpose, those purposes, multitude of purposes that buildings serve. So as we look at that, and then a consideration as I look at that, and I look at it as threat, and to threat there's opportunity, and this is really an opportunity discussion here. But the threat side of it, ASHRAE 90.1 energy based energy codes coming in, and then stretch building codes that move beyond that need to be dealt with. And as we look at that, the prescriptive side of ASHRAE 90.1, 30% window to wall ratio was, it's a gross simplification of it, but that's in there. And you look at 30% window wall ratio, Soviet concrete brutalist apartment blocks match that. And it's a danger that if that alone drives, then we're in trouble. Fortunately, we have a prescriptive route, and fortunately, we have technology moving forward, and we can certainly build great buildings inside that. But the point where we want to talk about here, I've been around the sustainable building and innovation. I started my PhD in a solar energy lab back in, it was 1987, I think, back then. So I've been around this world a long time. And one of the things that's always bugged me is people have looked at sustainability, energy efficiency, renewable energy as a cost. And the simple side of it is, yeah, it's a cost, but there's a payback on it. We get an energy payback. But then an awful lot of people realize now that the paybacks can go orders of magnitude larger than the energy. Energy is still cheap in the scheme of things. And that payback can be orders of magnitude larger. And one of the places is we look at, as soon as you look at what buildings are there for, and I'm looking at the commercial and let's call it the commercial side of it, is where that can really come into focus. We have buildings where we employ people to do things, and a sustainable building, put the right elements in it, and people do things better, i.e., productivity can go up. The world of retail, well studied now, and they understand that, example of putting natural light into retail buildings, you can get a whole bunch more sales per square foot. So it can actually drive your top line. So, employee productivity is knocking that expense line down, so you get a better bottom line. And that top line can absolutely be driven by that. So anyway, in that context of, that's what the discussion about the sustainability revolution that's coming at us, whether we like it or not, is something that can be embraced, and people on the leading edge of this are embracing it. So we have some people who are on the front edge of that, and I can't wait to hear from them. So with that said, in that context, that I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. And why don't I ask just a couple minutes of yourself, Meagan Sykes. Let's start with you.
Perfect. Thanks, Doug. Well said in terms of the sustainability takeover revolution, as you call it. Looking forward to the discussion today with the fellow panelists here. For everyone, my name is Meagan Sykes. I'm the National Energy Manager for Sobeys. I'm housed under their real estate department. I also sit on the board of directors for the Green Building Initiative, which some of you may have heard of as well. So yes, looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks.
Thanks, Meagan. Over to Jeremy.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So Jeremy Knoll, I'm Director of Sustainability and Regenerative Design at BNIM Architects. A firm most well known for helping to create the AIA's Committee on the Environment, U.S. Green Building Council, and the Living Building Challenge. And in addition to my work here as Director of Sustainability, I also am president of an organization called Climate Action KC, which is a 10-county regional organization focused on creating top-down resources for all the great grassroots, bottom-up organizations in the Kansas City market across 140 municipalities, and helping those municipalities to achieve net zero before 2050.
Thanks, Jeremy. Stephen Lilly.
Hi, folks. Steve Lilly, co-founder of Protocase and 45 Drives. Not too much in detail. Protocase, manufacturer of custom low-volume metalwork for primarily aerospace defense engineering. 45 Drives, a designer, manufacturer, and supplier of high-density open source data storage servers. My reason for being here, I think, primarily is the buildings that we reside in. We have four buildings totaling about 100,000 square feet. Two of those buildings are insulated metal panel buildings. So I guess three are, two of which are naturally daylighted facilities. One being manufacturing, one being office space. And I think I'm here to talk a little bit about the impacts of those naturally daylighted buildings.
Thanks, Stephen. At that moment, so I'm going to get Melissa to take us to our first discussion point.
Thank you, everybody. That was great. Thank you for introducing yourselves. It's so amazing that you could join us for this summit. We had such a welcome turnout on the first two, so we're very excited about the last two. So the first bullet that we're going to discuss was increased dwell time and mood enhancement and how products look better in full spectrum light. So who would like to speak to that first? I know apples look really nice and shiny under full spectrum daylight. Meagan, would you like to interject there?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick it off. Just in terms of, how we present a product. And if you go back and you think about grocery stores, and I talked about this with Joe on the podcast before, we're a little bit unique in the sense that everybody goes to a grocery store. And sometimes that's multiple times a week. It's really kind of a unifying building in that sense, where everybody will come in at some point. And so, again, if we step back and think about the evolution of these spaces, back in the day, this was a farmer's market or open air market was typically how we got our produce stands, the butcher shops you go and visit as well. And so I think that it's just a natural cohabitation of what we need in these grocery stores and in these types of spaces. Of course, we want to see our food and our product in daylight. That's how they were produced. That's kind of the natural genesis of everything. And so incorporating it within our stores, not only does it make it a much more pleasant experience for our customers and people who come in and visit, it's a better work environment for our staff and the people who help us run our grocery stores and who are there stocking and making this a pleasant experience for everyone. And so the incorporation of daylight is something that I think is incredibly important, not just for grocery stores, but like you said, of course, apples look really nice under daylight, but it lends itself to other aspects of, how do we incorporate this? Doug, I think you brought up the fact that, the ASHRAE 90.1, if we kind of just take a brutalistic approach to it, that 30%, and we end up with these concrete blocks and, aesthetically, we could get there from an energy level. And as an energy manager, yes, energy is very important to me in terms of the calculations, but we also need to look at it from a human level of we're not supposed to be in these dark spaces. There's been incredible number of studies done, not simply just on a retailing side, but just on a general health and well-being for occupants and how daylight affects mood, how it affects our mental and physical well-being. So not just for making apples look good, but for continuing to make our communities healthier and make them feel good as well. I'll turn it over to my fellow panelists.
Well said. Does anybody else care to interject, Steve?
100% agree with that. When I think of dwell time, you do think of retail outlets and shiny apples, but dwell time can also be looked at in saying we got to create very inviting environments so our staff who come through the door in the morning, they want to be there, they want to stay there for their 8 hours. And the other impacts being, naturally daylighted environments enhance creativity. And those things, creativity directly correlates to productivity. So, bottom lines are affected when you think of it from that perspective. So bringing the people indoors, to Doug's point, and making them want to stay and enjoy themselves is a big part of why we do what we do in terms of daylighting.
For sure. And go ahead, Jeremy.
I was just going to tag on to that and kind of go to the next type of population that comes to a place and has a set schedule, like students, right? who have a certain time of day that they're going to be in a building, kind of no matter what. They might get outside for recess or to play in the park or something like that, but otherwise they are in that space for most of the day. And so designing space that is conducive to mental health, to physical health and well-being, but also spaces where we're using things like natural light and tuned light to help impact students and teachers' moods and ability to retain and build memory, to focus. Those are all critical aspects of introducing daylight and natural materials into space as we design them.
Well said, Jeremy. I'm going to add on to this to just say, in my mind, dwell time and the mood enhancement also naturally goes with the idea of resiliency. And so, if we have the incorporation of daylight into our building, should there be a severe weather event or a grid disruption, we're not as reliant as we would be of, in those concrete box buildings of where, okay, we can't perform or we can't provide a indoor environment to where we can continue on. If you look at it in terms of maybe from a emergency or natural disaster standpoint, our firefighters, our front linesmen, they're going to need spaces to where, should a major operation need to take place, that they're going to be able to be in an indoor space or environment where they can coordinate. Here in Nova Scotia, if we think back to the fires, unfortunately, last summer, I think that was a great example. I mean, just in terms of how many different communities were affected, how many different people needed to be on the front line. And we need to have these spaces to, be able to support those people and support our communities in terms of being more resilient to, like I said, climate events, natural disasters, or grid disruptions.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Next bullet. And again, you guys all touched this. These things all mix together because they're just by nature, totally connected. Effect on human resources, the effect on profitability, productivity, and cost control. Anybody? Can I throw that to Steve first?
Most definitely. Mr. Evil Capitalist here, we get shot upon by sometimes the media for the need to make money, but at the end of the day, making money is absolutely critical to us to be able to employ our staff and keep them in decent environments. So, and you take that goes, making money is done because you're more productive, you're more efficient, and it goes right up the ladder to how do you achieve that? And from the perspective of a naturally daylighted facility, we absolutely know, I spoke to it earlier, that creativity is enhanced. People enjoy coming to work. They're more productive. All speaks to the bottom line. And there's all kinds of other pieces. Doug, you spoke to it. We talk about CO2. We have to monitor those levels to make sure there was a direct correlation between creativity and CO2 inside environments. But for us, it's really important, both from a manufacturing standpoint and in our office area, where we are just creating those environments where our employees just enjoy being there. They're more productive, they're more efficient, and they're more effective. And it trickles all the way down to the bottom line, which I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, it's important that we make money.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. Jeremy?
Yeah, so in our work, we're currently working with a number of large corporate organizations that have older buildings, right? That might be from the 60s or even earlier in some cases. Deep floor plates, dark glass. We can all imagine this office building in our minds. There's examples of them, countless examples of them across the U.S. But a lot of the work that we're doing with these clients is to figure out, number one, how to get more daylight into the space, and number two, how to make the space healthier in general, how to incorporate things like natural materials, growing plants, things that connect them to nature in ways that they might not be able to currently. And the reason we're doing that, yes, is about their day-to-day bottom line, but it's also about their long-term health of their organization, their ability to both attract the best talent and then retain talent. So having a space that is lovely to be in, that where you feel more productive, where you feel happier, those are spaces where employees, right, especially those right out of school, are going to start their careers and stay with their careers. The space that I'm in right now is part of the Crown Center complex here in Kansas City, what used to be a Hallmark Cards building. And if you can believe it or not, it was wall-to-wall cubicles with dropped ceiling and dark glass, maybe 30 or 40 feet away from you. And you can just barely see it over my shoulder, but a lot of the work that we've done is to remove all of those walls. So we have 3 directions of views out into the green roof and landscape around us. So daylight and views are something everyone has access to here that makes it a place that we can measurably see the difference in both employee productivity, but also in terms of long-term employee retention.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about that connection. We often talk about that Advanced Glazings. The idea, the downside, the threat we have, the dark box. Sins of the past, schools with absolutely minimal windows. The big box stores are still there, and just build great big, huge, thick, insulated walls, efficient HVAC. Drop your ventilation rates down, and CO2 levels go up inside. But hey, it's all good. We can claim that they're sustainable, but they're not nice for humans. That's this dividing line of distinction that's not in the building codes. And that idea of connecting, and then you connect. We always point out on one side, disconnecting through the dark box is not a place to go, not human friendly. You go to the other side, the all glass building envelope. You struggle with energy performance on it, but
and glare.
And glare, and then you try to tackle glare by darkening the glass. All of a sudden, it's permanent November. It's a depressing place to be in. So it's that middle space and managing that connection that we need to do to create those really great spaces. So, and Meagan.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad you said that, Doug, in terms of creating these middle spaces, because I often find, whether it's in our green building rating systems or energy codes, or, even our construction specifications that we issue, construction itself can very much sometimes be black or white when we're trying to conceptualize these very much difficult problems that we're looking at in terms of how do we bridge the gap between where we need to be on an energy efficiency side in order to help us meet, whether it's, my organization's targets for, 2030, 2040, and trying to get to net zero, versus how do these buildings operate, and how do the occupants within these buildings operate, and how can these go together and coexist so that you're not giving up, like you said, windows for in the sake of energy efficiency, or too many windows for the sake of aesthetics. And I think that's where I'm a huge proponent of. This is such a broad, wide issue that we need as many people involved and invested in this as possible. We need people in the trades. We need people, on our design teams and engineers who are kind of looking at this from a whole, life cycle aspect. Our building materials and energy efficiency, in my mind, go hand in hand. They're not separate. We can talk about CO2 and CO2e all we want, but we're not going to build our way out of a climate crisis. It's not going to happen. We have to be able to address, like we said, this elder stock that we have of these classic kind of old style buildings that aren't aesthetically pleasing, aren't great to work in, and aren't great on energy. And so how do we do that in terms? And, you brought up earlier that, in capital costing, when we get our capital budget in on, especially with the increase in price of construction materials and just the overall increase in the cost of living right now, it's, sustainability initiatives are sometimes like the first off the chopping block. Like, we can sit in a design meeting and spout all we want. Yes, we want solar panels, green roof, for, beef up that envelope. But at the end of the day, costing comes in and it's like, well, okay. And then we end up building the exact same thing that we've always built because it meets budget and it gets the job done. And unfortunately, we're going to have to shift that mindset that gets the job done is not getting the job done, actually. So yeah, I think it's a huge mindset change and paradigm shift that we're going to have to involve not just building owners, but, like I said, everybody who's involved in the design and operations of our buildings.
Yeah, that's interesting. You bring up that whole retrofit thing, right? Can't build our way out of it. That was interesting. Then you got those cost constraints. We have a project that comes to mind when you say that. It's not happening yet. Actually Newfoundland. It's got I don't know, it's an 8-story tower, all glass tower, early 80s, poor energy efficiency, end of lifetime, and they're actually looking at with our stuff, the R25 Solera. You look at an envelope like that and you go, what do you do? It's curtain wall, right? And what do you do? Like, it's so expensive to rip that curtain wall off and put something else on there. But anyway, R25 going back in there, it gets them up over their targets. So it's really interesting, an incredibly cost-effective way to do that. But that whole retrofit thing, and that retrofit within the economic, the amount of space we have, because there's only so much space in reality financially on things. So that's where it is. But if that can be done and create a better building, higher productivity, I always come back to daylight, and it's self-serving for me because we sell daylighting. But daylighting is that prime factor. It's the visible green. It's the one you walk into. In my mind, there's two things: fresh air and daylight are the two things when you really connect fresh air and daylight in a building. Push the CO2 levels down inside, and talk about that. CO2 from us breathing. Push that way down, and you put great daylight in the building. People walk in the space and say, "Wow, is this ever nice?" And they're the ones that I think they're the ones that give you the big impact. So much other stuff it can affect an expense line, but they're the top line drivers. They're the big two as far as I'm concerned. Melissa, you want to take us to our next point?
Well, you kind of just walked your way into it, or I guess I should say you sailed your way into it. Cost reduction. The cost reduction on artificial lighting and HVAC systems when you do incorporate things like natural diffused daylight. So you could probably speak to that, but Steve, do you want to interject?
Sure. Sorry, I was on another point, but yesterday, Melissa, we pulled up a couple of shots of our manufacturing facility with naturally daylighted section. One was completely naturally daylighted and the other was not. And one of the things you can note when you look there, so you look in the dark section of that building. This is when we were first constructing it, so it's not the way it looks today, but you see the full ceiling of lights on there in that section of the building. And if you actually go and you look at our naturally daylighted section, which you can see in the background, it's just beautiful down there. There's absolutely no question about it. But look up and you see all those nice lights that we have up, the light fixtures up top, and not a single light is on in that space. And that's the way we live our days in Protocase in the manufacturing side of things. And the same goes for our office space in one of our other buildings with 45 drives. And I find the other thing that's quite interesting is that, this is a insulated metal panel buildings with SoleraWall. And, when you look at that, you say, the traditional steel building compared to what you can produce here in terms of look and feel, not just inside, but outside as well. And, our buildings just absolutely glow at night. I don't know if we have any night shots or not, Melissa, but, and you talk about brand recognition. For us, we don't have customers come through our door. Our customers all, 90% of our business is sold into the US. So we don't see our customers. But from a recruiting perspective and things like that, in terms of brand awareness, our buildings are the nicest looking buildings in town, especially when you drive by them in the nighttime. And it's just absolutely just a beautiful feeling that you get when you drive through those buildings. So it's quite amazing the impact that they can have.
I couldn't get my hands on one in time for this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Come
And
to Sydney.
I don't actually have the numbers on the lighting, but when you don't have to have your lights on through the entire run of the day, it is impactful. There's no question about it.
I think I really appreciate the images. That's helped super helpful to illustrate exactly the points here. I'm going to come back though to something that Megan said earlier about resiliency. The idea that you can operate in a space without lights on, right? That's not necessarily a requirement to occupy that space and be in there. Similarly, some of the work that I'm doing with Climate Action KC right now is looking at how do we develop neighborhood resiliency centers. So we're looking at existing community centers, libraries, et cetera, that are located in walking distance to lower income neighborhoods in our community, and thinking about adding things like solar and battery backup so that those centers, if the grid goes down, can continue to operate as a place where people can come to either cool down or heat up, depending on the season, can charge a phone, can use the bathroom, and can really shelter there while their homes are being while the grid is being brought back up so they can return home. But part of that equation is thinking about are these spaces well daylit right now? If the power goes down, how can we reduce where we have to spend that energy in order to minimize the required equipment and systems to keep it up and running, especially during daylight hours? And so to have daylight introduced in a responsible way that is addressing both our value, but is also creating spaces that are completely occupiable with no power on for periods. It is a deep component of that neighborhood resiliency planning that we're doing and seeing implemented across both our community and globally.
Meagan?
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeremy. I'm glad you brought it up. And, I think also just how I said earlier, how energy efficiency and our construction materials go hand in hand. I fully believe that sustainability and, inclusivity and, companies' DEIB commitments also go hand in hand with our communities as well. We talk about, the cost reduction on our artificial lighting, for example. In some of our grocery locations, we'll have designated sensory times where, there's no music, lights are dim for those members of our communities who it's an uncomfortable experience to be underneath these artificial lights at that brightness level. And so I think that, again, I'm going to use the term paradigm shift of we need to think about daylighting as a resource for us to enhance our buildings. Why wouldn't you choose to work in that beautiful daylit space that Steve had up? And then also as a building owner and operator, you think, well, that's less fixtures I'm going to have to put inside my building, which means less, LED lighting I have to spend, which means less maintenance time. I don't have to go in at certain hours to change those out every 10 years or something. That's less disruption and that's less cost for me. So, I think it's just this whole picture of evaluating how we look at these resources that are often seen as a bonus. Daylighting shouldn't be seen as a bonus or an extra. It should be seen as something, maybe we need to look at putting an ROI on it or some sort of designator to show how valuable it can be and its impact in other areas and other aspects that it can touch. And not just for daylighting, but other resources as well. Our HVAC systems and, like you said, that fresh air. I think orientation of buildings needs to also be part of this experience from the very beginning. We're not just going to slap a building up just right there. Maybe we should take the time and run some, analysis to see, could we better optimize both daylighting, fresh air, walkability to our entrances? There's so many different things that we can be doing and so many different things we could be doing better that would have a huge impact, not just on our building owners and our profitability or, reducing our costs in that aspect, but for, our building occupants and our communities as a whole.
Just going to tag on to what you said, Meagan. Those are all amazing points. But when you said daylight isn't a bonus, yesterday at session 1, Seth Warren Rose from NRF Institute had said they have a program called Right to Daylight, where they feel that daylight is a human right, that everybody should have it. So I love that you said that. It kind of ties right in with what he was going with.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. The LED lighting thing. I just throw something. You mentioned LED lighting, and I'm just thinking of a couple of Better Buildings for Humans podcasts, a couple of circadian rhythm and people that have studied LED light and partial spectrum light, and I'm wowed by it. Actually, I'm looking at the buildings I'm involved in, and we're looking to see if we can fix that spectrum, especially the nighttime spectrum and LED lighting. But now, where the natural light's involved, your daytime people are absolutely fine. But there's some really fascinating risks on distorted spectrum lighting for human beings being in there a long time, and it's the stuff I think people should be aware of. It's absolutely fascinating.
I also found that nighttime shot. If you want to take a look at the B2,
Oh,
this
nice.
is the taken from an overpass. It's an older photo, but you can clearly see how it really glows up on the nightscapes here in Sydney. So yeah, just thought I'd share.
Thanks, Mark.
Just so we don't lose the thread of it here, before we go away from this topic, I do want to address the first thing you were talking about is cost reduction related to artificial lighting and HVAC systems. Most of the cost reduction, from my perspective as an architect, is really focused on the performance of the HVAC. The lighting has some, especially now that we've moved almost entirely to LED across all project types. Our ability to adjust the sort of cost savings in the lighting piece is actually less important to us than connecting back to one of our earlier topic points about the productivity that's going to happen in there. Because almost no matter what we invest in the lighting system, having people that are happier and more productive under those lights or next to those windows is going to blow those savings so far out of the water that it's no longer a conversation about the sort of utility bill versus capital cost, and it becomes more of a life cycle conversation about the productivity and what's actually happening and generating money in that space than it is about where we're sort of losing money or spending money. However, that's often a difficult conversation to bridge with an owner who might not be thinking about beyond sort of a single bottom line focus, to connect the sort of HR sort of performance of their employees to that move, rather than just the reduction on a utility bill. Often takes a little bit of explaining or some holistic conversation about kind of connecting these dots with an owner before we can get to a really meaningful conversation around that.
Tell them to come back because I buy in 100% to what you just said. Absolutely. That is where the big bang is.
Right. So we had one of our panelists in session one. He pointed out that the realization so many times, buildings get built without because they're shaving dollars, and I get why people shave dollars. It's like, buildings I'm involved in, you got to shave dollars down. You only got so much budget, but the regret when natural light is not done properly, he says, comes after time and time and time again. People say, "Oh, that's what it's like." Glary, windows, blinds go down, and all of a sudden the artificial lights are on the whole time. And that the other thing I'll throw in that, Jeremy, calculations in the space where I spend a lot of my time. There's a cubicle area and some offices, all glass, wide open, very, very well daylighted. And on that one, we had another glance, and that was done. That space was built that way because of daylight and productivity. Came up again when we measured CO2 levels, and I got a paper given to me by somebody from Canada's National Research Council on CO2 and human performance. And it was a well-done study that set up an artificial or mock office and put a fairly large group of people in there for a fairly long time and got them to do tasks. And when you looked at the data for people's ability to succeed at these tasks, it was fascinating. Rote tasks like data entry were not affected by carbon dioxide rates. So in CO2, in indoor CO2, I can flip you that study. It's just it's an absolutely great study. But if you look at it, they went from I think 550 parts per million, so atmospheric being 4 and change. So the indoor going from, I think it was 650, 750, and 900. And you looked at but as soon as you looked at creativity and you looked at crisis management strategy, any of these higher level cognitive things, just dropped off dramatically. It was just unbelievable, the relationship as you went, you saw CO2 level go up. So this space, which has a number of engineers, technical people in it, and are doing high level cognitive work, and then the idea that these people get paid to do high level cognitive work, and then you poison them with CO2, you intoxicate them with CO2. So in that building, just did a retrofit. At first, we just cranked up the HVAC system, did a retrofit to do. It didn't have heat recovery in its ventilation, so with heat recovery ventilation, and we're at about 4 or 5 times the what a typical mechanical engineer would put in there. And the difference in the space is like you go in there and go, wow, this is like really fresh air in here. And not that the building was bad, it was just normal before that. So, and you look at that. So let me do the numbers in my head, because I got to my head. I did them the other day, and 50 people, and it's well, the average pay is well north of 50,000, but I can do the math in my head with that. So it ends up being $1,250 an hour, and for the human beings being in there. And then you look at that, and you want to look at a daylight productivity studies, 5 to 15% improvement in productivity. I'm kind of conflating the two. I'm talking about putting the CO2 level retrofit in there, but it will be the same thing in the daylight. So you look at that. So I'd pick 10% middle of that. It's $125 an hour. And for I don't know what utilities are for that, but utilities are probably, I don't know, $10 an hour, if that, like probably less than that. And we actually looked at makeup air on that, which would have been a big part of the utilities, before the HRV was in there, and it was $3 to $4 an hour. So you compare that to $125 an hour. I mean, that's the magnitude. That's what you're talking about. That's exactly the human, right. The human factors. And you look at retail, and it's just stunning on retail when you look at the studies of increased sales per unit floor area when you put good lighting in. And natural light being the very best lighting, and the paybacks are just stunning. It's just like unbelievable. And and as you say, talk to people and try to get them to buy into that. You got to walk them into good buildings. And what you got to do, you take them to a good building and say, imagine you own this, and versus an ordinary building. John Phillips said when he came into it was one of Steve's buildings. And he walked in there, and he went back to, he said, start of his career, he was at Bank of America in a cubicle farm, low drop ceilings, deep floor plate, just sort of Dilbert hell. And I think he described it as. And you look at that, and he says, wow, you look at this, it's got height, it's got air volume, it's got, it was one of the photos that Steve showed there, and the air, and that building was built with, the fresh air built right into it. And you look at that, you say,
environment that didn't suck.
That's what you said. This is a cubicle farm, and it doesn't suck. It's just nice space to be in. So that whole thing of getting it, and the other thing, and sorry, I'll shut up here and let you guys talk, but that's the space I'm talking about. And you look at that, and you go, yeah, it's like when you walk in there, you just get it, and you go, this is what it is. That building was built. I don't have numbers in my head, but that building is an incredibly cost-effective building too. It's not a premium building. It's like there's a whole bunch of simplifications to that building, and it ends up it's a tech company head office, and its dollars per square foot is exceedingly low, and it's pretty cool. Yeah, you don't have to spend a fortune to do it. Nice if you spend a fortune, you can you can do better stuff with budget, but. It's just a superb building. Anyway, that said,
that's just the beauty of being able to take what would be traditionally a dark steel building and turning it into that. I mean, it's just
transformative.
I don't have to say anything.
Yeah, and I think culturally we're at a moment in time where it is the time to start pushing this. I mean, COVID changed the way how we look at our work in physical spaces. I mean, if we look at who's on the call right now, myself included, currently I'm working from home today. So the increase of, hybrid work schedules, online shopping, you can get groceries delivered to your house as well. We have to culturally, we have to make our buildings better and less dull, in order to attract people to have them in the office. I'm a huge proponent of, having flexibility in a hybrid schedule. I think it's great, but there is something to be said of going into a space that is, it feels good. It provides itself to collaboration with your colleagues and employees or whomever. It brings people together. It encourages you to be creative or to succeed and get job done. I think that we often talk about productivity and profitability, and those are all great things, and yes, make our world go round. However, if we look at it as a human aspect, investing in our buildings in such a manner that it invests in our people, it just makes sense. And that's, I think, culturally how we're going.
Yeah, and Meagan, I look at that, like my view on it, those people who figure it out, it's like this is the opportunity, because those two things are actually inseparable.
I
Go ahead, Stephen.
That's exactly what I was trying to say. We were talking at the same time.
Yep, same thing. Let me get to our next bullet. How sustainable design can drive growth in the community. Let's talk about from the community aspect of building sustainable buildings and the impact that has on the community. Jeremy, do you want to jump into that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few. These are some pretty broad terms in this question. So I think part of it is going to come down to how do we define community? Which community? Is it the community of a building campus on a university, or is it the neighborhood surrounding a building that's being built? And I think ultimately what the answer becomes pretty similar between those questions about. I think first going back to the question of who is suffering and who is gaining from a project being built or developed. And if your answers to that question are all about addressing that suffering in a community, whether it's from folks who don't have access to daylight now to moving towards a space that is healthier, that is designed for people to be there, then I think back to this idea of the productivity that's happening in the place, but also the not just absenteeism, which is maybe people being homesick, or not being able to be in the office because they're not feeling well or have headaches from the glare that's happening in the space. But the idea of presenteeism, are people really present when they're in the building, and able to be to really thrive in that space? So this idea of economic growth and sustainable design, I think, comes down to, are people thriving in the space or are people suffering in the space? And if we can design buildings that are healthier based on the chemicals of the materials that we're putting into space, that are introducing better natural air into the space, so that they're breathing something closer to a purified outdoor air. And finally, that access to light and light that is tuned to what it is you're trying to accomplish in that space. All of those things working together make for a resident population or an occupant who is going to be happier and thriving. But I think back to this question of community is thinking beyond the borders of your building. Are you making decisions that are creating jobs in the community, that are emphasizing local and regional manufacturing, that are answering that same question about suffering through what are the inputs that are needed here, and what is the relationship of this building to the community surrounding it? Is it answering the suffering that's existing by creating a new amenity that doesn't exist today, for example? Earlier I mentioned the idea of these neighborhood resilience centers, which is simply the idea of taking an existing public-facing building like a library and turning it into a true community resilience asset, a place that isn't just for people, but it's a place for people to recover, to be protected from heavy weather or power outages. I'd go on, but that's probably plenty.
Beautiful. Thanks. Meagan?
Yeah, what you were saying was really speaking with me, Jeremy. I think, again, intrinsically, I think this goes back to the concept of resiliency. And, when it comes to the end of my career, the end of my lifetime, I want to be part of that generation, or part of that, group that was known for trying to better our communities and to get us, we're all here because we know the science. We completely believe in the need and the urgency that is surrounding both, our climate crisis, our crisis of affordability, our crisis of our communities in terms of cost of living and everything that goes around in this. I just think it is so just
Not to
intrinsically
mention mental
related.
health.
Yeah, mental health. We're at a time where we are more interconnected with each other than ever before. Jeremy brought up of, what community, is this our global community? Is this our, how do we want to look at this? And I think that in terms, of making choices and the perception of real estate and sustainability, as a property owner, we have tons of different stores all across Canada that serve diverse communities. And so it's not a one size fits all. We need to step back and say, make smart decisions. Perhaps the footprint or layout or orientation or construction materials that we use in this building in Nova Scotia, maybe we should step back and look at something different for the same type of store in Manitoba or elsewhere. I think it also goes into, we need to be smarter how we're making decisions. And that's what I think sustainability is really all about, is using the tools and data available to make smart decisions in order to inform your design, to ensure that you are making the right choices in the long run. For example, we're starting to do, we have climate data available to do modeling, and we can use that to make informed decisions. So instead of maybe buying this cheaper land where we can put a grocery store or what have you, any building owner, a property developer builds a REIT or, a MURB or anything, a new neighborhood, we do some modeling, go, you know what, that's at risk for a 100-year flood event, and that's been exacerbated as the climate is showing us. So sure. I think that is going to lend itself into our sustainable choices in real estate should have the purpose of being an inspiration and helping make the business case for these types of buildings and making them inclusive. So yeah, like Jeremy said, I could go on forever about this, but I'll leave off there.
Awesome, Steve.
Sure. More of an isolated event, I guess, but so we're in the process of opening first office in the U.S. So as part of our venture, we went through a few different jurisdictions to try to determine, what best fit with us in terms of feel. And at the end of the day, the winning jurisdiction, it just felt right in that the responsiveness to the welcoming feel, the business friendly feel, and it was all about feel at the end of the day. And when I come back home and I look at our community, and we're talking about economic growth in a community, and these guys down where we were in Wilmington, I mean, they were really engaging, they were really welcoming, right? And I look at what we could be doing in our community in terms of encouraging economic growth and economic development. I sit there and I say, well, wouldn't it be ideal? One of the things that they did when we were down there is they showed off a bunch of stuff to us, right? Well, why don't we show off some really decent stuff? And I think, to come over and witness what we've done in some of these traditionally steel buildings and turn them into what we've turned them into. I mean, there's a really nice feel and message in that. And I think those are some of the things that we can lean on in terms of in speaking to this. Small piece, isolated case, but I absolutely think it could be impactful at the end of the day.
Thanks, Stephen. Melissa, last bullet.
Okay, so the last bullet is the perception and reality of higher value real estate investment. Who wants to take that one? Steve.
Volunteered.
Voluntold.
Well,
Both.
I'll unmute myself, so I won't get caught for that again. Well, I'm not sure I quite understand the question, but I mean, if I do look at it from the perspective of our buildings, and I think Doug spoke to this earlier. I mean, our buildings can go up relatively inexpensively, no question about that. And I think all things equal, I mean, we've got economics that play into it and everything else, but all things equal, I mean, if you put us up against any other, standard steel building, there would be absolutely no comparison in the perceived, not the perceived, but the actual real estate value of those properties. It just speaks to definite, premium value at the end of the day. And I think especially with our 45 Drives building, where that was a build from scratch, not one that we added on to. You drive by that building and what you look at is what you see is a valuable building, not just a steel structure. And I think at the end of the day, by building that sustainability or that daylighting into that facility, really enhances the overall value from a real estate investment perspective.
Sorry, I had to
I'll-
remember to unmute too, but you can go ahead, Jeremy.
Okay. Just so as an architect working at portfolio scale with a lot of clients, this is actually a question we try to answer pretty consistently, especially as we're working on more and more large corporate office property holders who are trying to figure out how to pivot with office stock that isn't as well occupied right now as they want it to be. And what we're seeing is a flight to quality. So people leaving Class B offices and moving up to Class A offices. And so Cushman Wakefield, I think, is one of the preeminent organizations around corporate real estate, and their findings show that LEED certified buildings achieve $4.13 per square foot, or about 11% higher rent than a non-LEED certified building, just as an example. So across their entire portfolio globally, that's more than a 10% improvement that they're seeing on the projects that have certified in some way where they're proving what they're doing. That includes daylight and efficiency and other things. But beyond the rent premium, what they're seeing is also a cost efficiency to operate that building or those buildings. So not only do they have a higher premium on rent, but if it's a utilities paid situation, that cost to them is substantially and measurably lower. These are also buildings that are increasingly prepared for the future. So prepared for additional, adding renewable energy to the building or other investments on that asset that can only improve that total both operational performance cost as well as the premium that they can get on rent and the satisfaction of the people that are in there. And then finally is a lot of these spaces are focusing on corporations or being rented to corporations that are ESG focused or those that are trying to demonstrate corporate social responsibility in where they're investing, how they treat their employees. So those three things are some of the measurable ways that we're seeing and communicating with clients all the time about the reason why we would certify, the reason why these things are important beyond just the sort of initial bottom line or single bottom line.
That's very powerful. I definitely wrote that down to get that information from you. Meagan, would you like to interject?
Yeah, I'll just say, yeah, I agree with everything that both Jeremy and Steve have put out there. And I think it's a really unique position because we have to have this adaptability within our buildings itself. When I say adaptability, I think that means in terms of, what future climate holds for us, what future community needs hold for us, whether that's the neighborhood respite areas that Jeremy was talking about, or, for an organization, if they're expanding or going down or, need to rework the office space, we need to be able to have that flexibility and adaptability within our buildings in order to accomplish that. That holds high value in terms of a real estate. On the other hand, in terms of looking at, increasing value of real estate, I think that it's also important that we make this an inclusive process. Oftentimes, it's our lower income neighborhoods and communities that are so desperately in need of these types of buildings to serve their needs, that they just don't have the access to. And so, in my mind, as a property owner and building owner, we need to make sure that we're inclusive with that, and I think that comes down to our green building communities, having these types of discussions and platforms where we can come together with different perspectives and knowledge base to come together and share this, if that's donating time or, looking at ways that we can ensure that, is my property or is my building serving its purpose beyond just a physical box, So I think it's just so interconnected and something that, yes, economic and the property values itself is important, but, as we've seen, property values aren't necessarily going down. Anybody trying to buy a house at this point, I feel you. Like, it's how can we make the building itself? The land is always going to be valuable, but how do we make our buildings valuable, both economically in terms of if we're going to turn around and sell it, but valuable in the sense of the purpose it serves and what it can serve.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And look, we're at the end of our time, so I am going to, first of all, thanks to my co-host Melissa, and thank you to the panelists. I really appreciate your time and your insight. Superbly interesting discussion, and I'm going to turn it over to John Phillips to wrap it up.
So many great points, guys. Jeremy, I couldn't agree more. Return to quality is everything. Just last bit from me. Like in the New York City agency world, trying to get people back into buildings, grade B and grade C buildings are over with. But when you have a move to grade A, where you've got a green envelope and, air quality meters, right? When people come off the elevator, we're actually empirical data showing, a surge to those buildings. So yeah, couldn't agree more. Anyway, awesome, engaging discussion. Maybe one of the best ones yet. Just really value add. We're going to push out this link to you guys so you can share with your social media channels, with your companies, and anybody that you think would get value out of today's discussion. Feel free to use this asset however you want to. I know we're going to have a lot of fun repurposing this content over the next few weeks and months even. So that's really it, guys. We can't thank you enough for being a part of the Better Buildings community. I know a lot of you are alums of the show. Thank you for being friends of Advanced Glazings, and yeah, have a great rest of your day. If you get a chance to attend, we have another session starting here in 25 minutes. It's going to be our 4th of 4 for our inaugural WODBS summit, which has just been a lot of fun thanks to you guys. So yeah, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.